In 2 days, Boris Johnson's probably going to be Prime Minister. But it's not a sure thing yet. I'm scared, because I think we've all been lied to. And we can only make good decisions if we're faced with all the facts, so I'm going to try and tell you about who Boris Johnson really is. When Boris was a kid, his parents moved house 32 times. They went all over the world. His father was a journalist, and he never really settled anywhere. His mother was pretty unhappy by the sounds of it. She had a massive nervous breakdown. His father was a proper womanizer, which will come up later. But his father pushed him really hard to be really competitive and to become what he called world king. He studied classics at Oxford, and he was taken into this thing called the Bullingdon Club. The Bullingdon Club started out as a cricket club, but by the time Boris joined it, it was infamous for their acts of terror, intimidation, vandalism and sexual debauchery. Famous for things like going into a restaurant and just absolutely trashing the place, smashing it to matchwood, then throwing a cheque on the table that paid for everything. One of the tests that you had to go through to join the Bullingdon Club was to burn a £50 note in front of a homeless person. So this is the kind of thing that Boris did. So to get into this club, basically you just had to be able to throw away money, basically burn money, just spend. They'd have these big dinners that were like, they'd hire like loads of prostitutes, and the prostitutes would perform sex acts at the dining table. If the club members wanted to pay them extra and have sex with them in a different room, they'd do that. They'd be horrible to these women and then pay them ridiculous amounts of money to get away with it. If you remember the story about David Cameron putting his genitals in a dead pig's mouth, this was the club. This was the people that did it. Part of the purpose of this club is that these people knew that they were so rich and entitled that they will one day be running the country. So if they all had dirt on each other, they couldn't betray each other. In 2016, a Bullingdon member called Ralph Perry Robertson said, "We'd always hire whores. Prostitutes were paid extra by members who wanted to use them." A woman who was there at the time, she was a recruiter because it's an all-boys club, women can't get in. But she said the whole culture was for them to get extremely drunk and exert vandalism. Every time somebody was elected, they had to have their rooms smashed to pieces. People talk about the Bullingdon Club trashing places, but it was serious criminal damage. And one incident she recorded at Magdalen College, a large galleried room that had just been refurbished with expensive wood panelling. Every piece of furniture that could be broken was broken, every liquid sprayed around the room, the panelling was cracked, and everything was piled in a heap in the middle of the floor. The college door to the Magdalen was smashed to pieces. So this is like an ancient Oxford college that's just being absolutely destroyed by these people who are just so entitled they don't care. I remember the clerk of works looking at the mess in complete dismay. The college had spent a great deal on the refurbishment. All the students who heard this late night destruction were terrified. Bullingdon members found it amusing if people were intimidated or frightened by the behaviour. I remember them walking down the street in Oxford tails, chanting "Bullet, bullet" and smashing bottles along the way just to cow people. So these guys are such assholes that they're like walking down the street and they're throwing bottles at people, glass bottles, and watching them smash, and they know that they can get away with anything because they're so rich. They can bribe, they can throw a cheque on the table, and they can do whatever they want. She said there was a culture of excess in the 1980s in which the activities of the Bullingdon Club felt normalised, and they had an air of entitlement and superiority. So basically these guys were just massive yuppies. They have long established networks and they think it's in their power to confer a higher office to anyone they choose. There is a bond of loyalty. At this time, Boris is voted head of the Oxford Union, and he becomes a bit of a womanizer. People start to realise he's got a lot of money, and he starts to become a little bit obsessed with women. After being at Oxford, he wants to be in a newspaper, so he joins the Times, but he's kind of a small fry at the Times. He's not very happy. He's used to being the big fish, and he gets fired quickly for making up quotes and attributing them to his godfather. So he thinks that if he says his godfather says something, he'll get away with it. But his godfather rings up the paper and says, "What the hell, I didn't say this." Boris gets fired. He's given a job by the Telegraph, whose editor Boris knew from Oxford. He got him to speak at the Oxford Union. He was made Brussels correspondent aged 25, and over the next 5 years, Johnson made his name by developing an obsessive narrative about anything to do with the EU being loopy or sinister, and he just made up stories, basically. And he lost all his credibility in Brussels. But as you can imagine, Little England loved it. They lapped it up, and he started to get really famous. In 1994, he became the Telegraph's chief political officer, even though he admitted to having absolutely no political opinions. He got a column in The Spectator, which he filled with casual racism, including terms like pickaninny and puffing coolies, homophobia such as calling gay men tank-top bum boys. He also wrote an article on the Labour Party conference where he talks about the hot toddy on display. So basically, he goes to the Labour Party conference and he reports on it, saying how fit the women are, and he writes an article on it in, I'll put it up in the paper. He pinned a porn calendar to his desk at work to piss off his female colleagues. He called Lady Diana on her death a feminist symbol of every woman who was ever wronged by a man. Later he compared gay marriage to bestiality and Muslim women to letterboxes. In fact, like, Islamophobia is kind of a big thing with him. This whole Islamophobia thing in the British media, I think it started with him. His dad is also really Islamophobic if you read some of the stuff that he said. He also caused a minor scandal when a tape of him arose, a phone conversation between him and his friend Darius Guppy, trying to help him arrange to beat up a journalist. But for some reason people just didn't seem to care. And one of the reasons they didn't care is because he was making regular appearances on a show called Have I Got News For You, which you've probably all seen. And it catapulted him to, like, massive fame. And when the subject of this tape came up, where he's essentially planning to beat somebody up for exposing something, he just rolled his eyes and ruffled his hair and go, and there'd be laughter and applause, and he became a kind of beloved idiot.
What were you recorded saying?
Honestly, I don't remember.
I do. Boris was on tape talking to Darius Guppy. His
A very great man. I don't want to be totally stitched up here.
What you want and what you don't want.
No, he was a school friend, wasn't he?
A great chap, yeah.
And a great chap,
Yeah.
despite being a convicted fraudster.
Convicted fraud, went very, very sadly wrong.
Yeah.
Major goof.
And one of the ways he went wrong is ringing you up on tape and suggesting that you help him beat up a journalist who was looking into him.
That did come up. I won't deny that did come up. I don't think I've ever commented on this before, so I'd better watch my words very carefully. That did come up. And since you choose to bring up this unhappy episode, I won't deny a word of it. I'm not ashamed of it. I did discuss how...
You sound like George Michael. You're not ashamed of it.
What are you not ashamed of, though, Boris?
Whatever there is not to be ashamed of. No, that's...
He was trying to get the address of this journalist out of you, wasn't he?
Yes, and owing to my great incompetence as a journalist, I wasn't able to provide it.
So the journalist didn't get beaten up in the end, but no thanks to you.
He will not be put into intensive care or anything like that. He will probably get a couple of black eyes and a cracked rib or something like that. Nothing which you didn't suffer rugby, okay? But you get scared, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to get scared, I wanted to have no idea who's behind it.
He was made editor of The Spectator on the explicit understanding that he would drop his parliamentary ambitions. In 2 years, however, he'd become MP for the safe seat of Henley, promising its residents that he would step down from The Spectator. But he lied to the residents, he lied to his constituents, and he stayed on there for another 4 years. So he's doing two jobs at once, essentially. While he's at The Spectator, he's cheating on his wife ridiculously. This is his second wife. He's got 4 kids with her. But he's cheating with multiple people, including his employees at work. He lied about this affair to the Tory party itself and then got sacked for lying. When he was sacked for his dishonesty, he insisted that it was acceptable, even desirable, to lie. So he's basically saying to be a liar is a good thing. Boris was a pretty crap MP, and his affairs kept coming up in the press. His Bullingdon rival David Cameron, the one who put his willy in a pig, allegedly, became the Tory party leader and eventually PM, so he set his sights on the Mayor of London. He became mayor somehow, but he had almost no plans of what to do and was accused of lying, racism, and he even had a criminal conviction. So what did London do? Yeah, you guessed it, they elected him a second time. By waving some flags and getting stuck on a zip wire, the public completely ignored the £10 million that he poured into a project called the Garden Bridge, which not only never happened, but the company in charge of building it never even purchased the land it was meant to be built on. £10 million of public money disappeared into nothing, and despite attempts, no prosecutions were made. I'm just going to say the word embezzled, and I'm just going to let it hang there. It's like, you do with it what you will. But somewhere in the midst of all this, he had a love child with another woman, and he gave the kid away. When asked by a journalist how many children he had, he refused to even acknowledge that he had this child. When Boris was mayor of London, he was pro-EU, pro-immigration and anti-Trump. But as it became clear the Conservative Party was swinging to the right, he pivoted. Famously, he wrote 2 columns for his newspaper. One was pro-Brexit and one was anti-Brexit. He decided to publish the pro-Brexit article because it became obvious that if he opposed David Cameron's stance on Brexit, if David Cameron left, he'd stand a chance of becoming Prime Minister. This is what Boris's unpublished article said. Britain's continued membership of the EU will be a boon for the world and for Europe. This is a market on our doorstep, ready for further exploitation by British firms. The membership fees are rather small for all that excess, so why are we determined to turn our back on it? Becoming the head of the Vote Leave campaign, he then painted an absurd lie on the side of a bus that it cost us £350 million per week to stay in the EU. He promised that if we left the EU, then this money would go to the NHS, which is why a lot of people, including my mate, voted to leave. In the last few weeks, we've seen documents that were redacted by the Tory government leaked, showing that in trade talks with the US, privatisation of the NHS and drug company copyright extensions that could cripple the NHS are on the negotiating table with Donald Trump. Something we've been warned about since TTIP, and Donald Trump himself said that the NHS was a bargaining tip in trade deals with the US. These documents were presented by Jeremy Corbyn, who also showed documents proving that Boris lied about the Northern Ireland border. Now, I don't understand how this didn't end Boris. Any of this stuff should end Boris, but it doesn't. Jeremy Hunt, by all records the worst health minister ever to walk the planet, a man so inept that he was followed around by a protesting tuba player playing clown bass while he walked, actually wrote a book on how to bankrupt the NHS and sell it off to private medical firms. And Boris is following this plan. Boris has never and will never do anything for anybody but himself. His upbringing is so entitled that he feels no guilt over lying to his wife, lying to his kids and lying to the country. Even his own daughter called him a selfish bastard.
Good point.
This man is a scumbag, and the chances are he's going to be Prime Minister in 2 days. So why are people voting for him? I think it's because Jeremy Corbyn, who is a man who holds a flipping Peace Prize, has been attacked in the media so much that nobody thinks he's a serious option anymore, and I don't understand why. They've called him a communist spy, a terrorist, an anti-Semite, and the only evidence seems to be hearsay printed in the Daily Mail, which is so unreliable I can't even source from Wikipedia anymore. In reality, he's a lifelong peace campaigner, an anti-racist campaigner, a gay rights campaigner, a human rights campaigner. He's one of the few who rightly opposed the Iraq War, and he's been on the right side of history as far back as I can find. When Thatcher was making homophobic speeches about how it should be illegal to talk about homosexuality in schools, Corbyn was out campaigning for gay rights.
Children who need to be taught to respect traditional moral values are being taught that they have an inalienable right to be gay.
When Thatcher was endorsing South African apartheid, he was arrested for peacefully protesting it. He led the Stop the War coalition and was ostracised by his party for not endorsing the bloody Iraq War that left 1 million dead and caused the founding of ISIS. There are stories about it taking him hours just to walk down the street as he stops to talk to all the homeless people he passes. Damn it, the man even gives jars of homemade jam to the people that he meets. That is the man that I want to be Prime Minister. If there's a man who represents the kindness, the gentility, the openness and friendliness of the great British people, it's Jeremy Corbyn. We need affordable homes, an NHS, proper care and welfare, a green future, a revitalised industry, and a country that's not run by elites. and Labour has a plan signed off by over 100 economists to make this happen. Please, for the sake of our young people and for our future, vote for Jeremy Corbyn in the 2019 election.